David, a lot going on legally, and I want to just start with this trans issue and the court judgment that was handed down on uh, on trans kids. These are kids who might get puberty blockers prior to being 18 years old. Can you speak to this question and how the court wrestled with this?
Well, I predicted this from the oral argument, which seemed to go the way that the decision went. It was 6-3. The usual suspects, the three Democrats, were in dissent, and all of Trump's appointees were huddled together, along with Roberts, Alito, and Thomas, who are his three Trump's non-three picks. Basically, they said as to these laws, let's say the one in Tennessee, and there are some other ones like it around the country, all in the red states, not in all the red states, but all of these blocker type laws are in red states so far. And basically, they've been challenged as sex discrimination. And the answer is kind of disingenuous, I think, from the majority on the Supreme Court. But what they say is this: you can't get a you can't get a, if you're under 18, you can't get a puberty blocker. You can't get any of these kinds of drugs that help you change your sex, whether you're a boy going to a girl or whether you're a girl going to a boy. So whereas the sex discrimination applies to both boys and girls. And on that fatuous basis, they decided the case. And it looks like other states like Tennessee that want to do that will be allowed to do it, at least for anyone under the age of 18.
The questions around this, David, I mean, I know it's fraught with all sorts of issues about gender and about the irreversibility of some of these things, Um, was that the stuff of the legal minds that went over this, or was it more politics?
Well, I mean, the people looking at this issue think it's almost all politics, and they think that the Democrats are kind of out of step on this issue politically, whether they're on a human level, on an understanding people and what people do. If they're on the right level of understanding it, Trump has even trumpeted the fact that 85% of the country is with him on these wedge issues. This is one of his wedge issues. It's the same sort of issue as girls' sports teams. Some of the girls on the team, some of their parents, some of the members of the public complaining that people who are biologically male, that were born male and have transitioned, have too many physical advantages over the girls in sports like basketball and other sports like that, and should not be allowed to play. And I think we've seen that all over the country. And I think that that's a big loser for the Democrats politically. And so I think that Trump and the red states are going to try to hammer home those decisions. And, Newsom has actually waffled on that a bit, maybe taken the right position from some people's point of view. Newsom, to the extent people think that he's the presidential candidate for the Democrats in 2028, they think, yeah, and he waffled on this issue. I think maybe he got on the right side of this issue. If 85% of people are on this side of the issue, maybe a Democrat ought to be on the side of the issue, because you can't exercise any power to do anything if you don't win. So I guess to answer your question, the argument goes that if you don't start at 15 or 16, you can't, transition as well. That's really the age to start, at 15 or 16. And then, of course, the other side of it is that at 15 or 16, you shouldn't be making such a momentous decision. You save, you can't really go back on it. So they see that some people say you got to start at 15 or 16 for it to really be meaningful and for it to kick in and to be done right. And that some of these people have such dysphoria over their sex. And then, all the rest of the politics of it, that there are supposedly groups that encourage it, that somehow the peer pressure, I kissed a girl and I liked it, that kind of a thing, that there's this kind of peer pressure, and that kids, obviously 15, 16, are very susceptible. And then there's the whole issue of whether the parents have to be informed or not. And that drives people crazy too, when supposedly schools or teachers at schools are encouraging kids to have a sex change and their parents aren't even informed about it, which all of it is mind-boggling. You have to figure how dysfunctional some of these families must be, but that doesn't mean that the law can't try to protect this issue, whether there are dysfunctional families where kids that you don't really understand. And I mean, we didn't have this, Mark, when we were kids. There was no ability to do this at all. Now there is this ability. there hasn't been a lot of controversy about paying for it. We pay for lots of medical procedures. So most of the screaming hasn't been about the cost of it. It really does hit some people way, way wrong, that you can change your sex, and especially that you can start at the age of 15 or 16. And that's what motivates these laws like in Tennessee, which just got upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court 6-3.
Yeah, you summarize it so beautifully. I mean, there are all those things working, all those elements, all those variables working on this question. Randy says, doesn't the SCOTUS ruling on transgender care for minors align us with countries like the UK, who I believe have stopped such treatments for minors? Are we now conforming to sort of the way the rest of the world looks at all of this, David Katz?
Well, the UK and some of the Scandinavian countries were kind of the vanguard on this. And then they did some studies that I guess were sort of respected, by doctors, psychiatrists looking at this and saying, you know what, maybe we are going too far. Maybe we're allowing kids to make this decision without parental consent or too young in life. But I have to laugh at the Republicans because they always say we shouldn't consider what other countries do in their laws. Scalia, the Supreme Court. I can't believe it. Counsel, you're quoting foreign law. This is an American court. And so all of a sudden, when it goes the right wingers' way, when it goes the prohibitionist way, suddenly it's so relevant what the Scandinavian countries and what the UK does. So but we've gotten so used to this hypocrisy now.
The last thing, because I remember this, it was Trump's inauguration speech, during which he said, from this moment on, there will be two genders in America. I remember it because it was just the way he put it. It sounded so dictatorial. I thought the way he packaged the message, I guess, it was so hard. It was so hard edged, And he said, from this moment on, there'll be two genders in America, male and female. And he got this big, uproarious applause. But that sort of is the unwavering position of these conservatives, social conservatives, right? Political conservatives, and Trump himself.
Well, everything, of course, changes as it does with the right to abortion if it happens in one of these right-wingers' families. They have kids who are, LGBTQ like anybody else. The same, all these people say it doesn't happen to Republicans or it doesn't happen in my country. People will tell you we don't have that in the Arab world. Well, there's a certain percentage of people who are LGBTQ in every population, every human population, and likewise there are a certain number of people who are, have this sexual dysphoria and they want to be the other sex. And so, as I say, the huge issue is not about paying for it. And the huge issue is certainly not about wealthy people, including whether they're stalwart Republicans or not, paying for it if they have money. But it does, the rubber hits the road when you want the public to have to pay for it. That's something where we're going to see that issue come up. And where you start at 15 or 16, as I say, people say to do it right, and you want to have the change, you want to start at 15 or 16. But then this one who used to, you remember Trump was interviewed by her years ago when he ran the first time, and he said there was blood all over everything, and he demeaned her and defamed her and despised her. This lady is, she's got to come back as someone who's so concerned about, let's say, someone who has their breasts removed, and then they want to have breasts later on, or they get all unhappy with their decision. And obviously, there are some people who are unhappy with lots of decisions, including major decisions. So she's been in the news, and that issue has been in the news. And of course, they're all bad things, Mark, to think about. If you really, really want this operation and you're not under peer pressure, and it's just the right thing to do from every point of view, you ought to be able to start it at 15 and at 16. And in Tennessee, you cannot, as I understand the law that just got affirmed. In the blue states, things have not changed to that extent. And apparently, if you need to have it paid for, if you have a program that pays for it, apparently they'll pay for it. I don't know all the aspects of that, but there are some people who think, doesn't that cost a lot of money? I mean, we're the old economic conservatives who look at some of these issues and think, well, does that cost us a lot of money? And other people think, oh my God, Katz, are you out in the ozone? Does it cost a lot of money? Because it's such a huge, major issue for some people. And of course it is if you have a kid who really, really desires to transition.
Yeah, it's very important, though, the distinction you're making, which is that this was a judgment about what was going on in Tennessee. That was the appeal to the Supreme Court. I want to get to Newsom and Trump. Newsom has taken to smack talking Trump, very different kind of posture he has toward Trump from the first term, or as I like to call it, season one of the Donald Trump presidency, when there was more of a relationship that he was trying to build. Certainly, we needed federal dollars, we needed fire relief, this kind of thing. We still need federal dollars and fire relief. Of course, we contribute way more to the federal government than California gets out. I say we, meaning because I'm a Californian, but I'm wondering if you can speak to the legal back and forth, because Newsom is actually suing Trump.
Well, yes, this was the famous lawsuit that people have been watching, and I deflated expectations last week, Mark, on your show when I said I don't really think that this lawsuit that's now in the Ninth Circuit is going to change the fact that Trump has sent these National Guards men and women, and now parts of the Army here into Los Angeles. And the reason I thought that was because although a very distinguished judge had ruled in the trial court up in the Bay Area, by now it must be about 10 days ago, that this was illegal and unconstitutional, what Trump was doing. Basically, it was not shown that there was the danger of a rebellion here, that what was going on here was not only wildly exaggerated, but by Trump, and Fox News. But when you looked at it, it simply was not, as an objective person looking at it, danger of a rebellion. Words have meanings, and what we had here in Los Angeles in this small geographical area that was quelled really rapidly, except maybe for one night. One night's slow quelling does not make a rebellion or an insurrection. And so the judge said that, and he also said under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, that's part of the Bill of Rights. There are 10 of them. And one of the rights is the rights that are kept by the states to protect themselves and manage their own affairs unless the decision is expressly delegated to the federal government. And this was not something that was expressly delegated to the federal government to deal with a night's to deal with a demonstration that at night, or maybe for 2 or 3 different nights, came in a very small area of Los Angeles to have a lot of illegal conduct, some of which was not, the burning of the Waymos was shown on an endless loop. There were only so many Waymos, and that was only one, consolidated incident. But to show it over and over again, I gave the impression, as Fox tried to, that it was all over town, that there was some big rebellion. So the judge made a very sensible decision on that. And he said that he did have a right to judicially review it. And then he issued an order that basically Trump would have to turn over the federalized National Guard back to the state, back to Newsom. By the way, Newsom has said later that since that has not happened yet, we're actually going to have trouble training to fight and fighting fires because there's only one National Guard, and it's now been commandeered. It's been appropriated. And I think, and I agree with the district judge, misappropriated under the law by Trump. But here we stand. So that was stayed, though. That order of the judge was stayed by a panel of the Ninth Circuit. And once you saw who was on the panel of the Ninth Circuit, it was like, oh, my God, there are 3 judges on an appellate panel. 2 of them were appointed by Trump himself. One of them is a real arch conservative. I mentioned this last week. Federalist Society, former law clerk for Justice Clarence Thomas. Do you want to play the thing?
I
come from regular stock.
Yeah,
there we go. There we go. And I'm sure that law clerk came from regular stock too, through the Federalist Society to Justice Thomas's selected employment. Anyway, I think he's probably a lost vote on this issue. There's another judge who's from Hawaii who may be the basis of a 2-to-1 decision, but we sure haven't seen it yet. And I think even if there's a Democrat, female judge appointed picked by Biden, who's on there too, although she didn't ask very great questions to make you think that it may go 3-0. And Mark, can I just comment on this for 1 second? It's sort of an interesting case from 1832. They talked about at this oral argument. Just Tuesday, they had an oral argument, which was on Zoom. Anybody could watch it. The sound was terrible, so I encourage you to take my version of it and not batter your ears trying to listen to the Zoom version of it. But she asked the question, how do I get around a case called Mott? Mott was a case from 1832 where the president called out and the case had hung around forever. It might have been from like the early days of the Republic, but the case batted around forever. It didn't get decided till 1832. And the issue in it is that the president has ordered troops of the militia into force to go fight the Whiskey Rebellion, who all of you will remember from American history. There's a guy who says, wait a second, I joined up for the Guard, the militia. I don't want to go fight, Americans shooting back at me in the Whiskey Rebellion. I ain't going. The guy says, I ain't going. So he gets prosecuted or court-martialed or fined or whatever it was. And his argument is that, the president doesn't have the unilateral power to call out the militia to go fight armed, armed men, armed revolters. This was a true rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion. Hence the name, the Whiskey Rebellion. So he ultimately loses. And when he ultimately loses in the Supreme Court and they say, no, you have to pay the fine or you have to submit to the court martial, they say, the president had the unilateral power to call out the troops or to mobilize the troops for the Whiskey Rebellion. That is so distinguishable. And that a Democratic judge would ask that question, like, well, how do I get around that case? I mean, it's very, very simple. This is something that there's a state governor in between. There was no state governor claiming you had no right to call out the militia. I had the right to call out the militia. And the plaintiff in that case was some guy who didn't want to serve. So to me, that case was so distinguishable that the fact that she asked that question and stayed with it, I think probably worst case, this case goes 3-0. I think it does not probably go 2-1 Newsom's way. I think Newsom was very smart, Mark, to bring it because I think that, it was the right thing to do. I think that this is unconstitutional and unlawful. And if this is right, Trump goes around and says, no judge, no court has the power to tell me that I can't call out the National Guard and federalize it anytime I want to. Boy, is that scary, because the next one could be the election. The next one could be anything that Trump doesn't like. And this idea that he has an unbridled power. And that's what the problem is. If these judges, these Trumpy judges, these judges picked by Trump, whether they get the Democrat to go with them or they don't, if they make that ruling, boy, that's like, and then people will say, oh, it's made by the liberal Ninth Circuit, which, by the way, our West Coast Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, is not so liberal anymore. Trump's had picks to it for 4 years. And he's having picks to it now. He will have picks to it now. So, but they'll say, well, if the Ninth Circuit, as liberal as they are, supported this. The only way that this could work out differently, Mark, is if somehow 2-1 they ruled for Newsom on the same basis that the learned, I think, correct district judge did. And I think even then it would be stayed. Then the Trumpsters would go, the Trump Justice Department would go to the en banc Ninth Circuit and say, you should at least stay this order. And then if they didn't, they'd run to the Supreme Court. I don't see any of this happening in the near term. And I do think people think, well, it's all calmed down, so it'll kind of go away and it'll wither and go away. But, the ICE raids are continuing, Mark. Even in the last couple of days, we've had more ICE raids. There will be more protests. Trump is like, oh, well, the courts aren't doing anything about it, so I'm going to keep it up. He actually issued a call for more Army troops, Army troops or Marine troops to come into LA. We do not have riots. There is no cause for this. If Trump can do this to us here, he can do it all over the country to all sorts of blue cities. This is a real threat to our liberties. Americans do not have the military in the streets. That is not an aspect of this country, just like it's not an aspect of civilized European countries. This is an aspect of banana republics that he's going to bring or try to bring to these blue cities.
Yeah, and it's so worth noting that in addition to, and this is just in California, everything going on with a military presence, and as you say, I think they are establishing a blueprint for other blue cities with a military occupation. I mean, it is unheard of. It is un-American in all the ways that you have referenced. But what's happening in California is beyond just the legal. Trump is now threatening all the fire relief money that was coming from the feds. He wants to derail that. He wants to pull it. He wants to bring California to heel, under his dominant and unyielding reign. And so he is very much talking about the fact that whether or not he approves disaster funding for the wildfires, may have everything to do with how California is behaving and whether or not there are ongoing legal hassles that are presented to him. So that's something else that I would ask you. Can you, I mean, I guess you need to know how to do it, but can you sue over money that should be rightfully dispatched to California in the sense that federal relief money is entitled to those people who need it?
There's also a suit, I think, in the federal courts regarding trying to hold back transportation department funds. This would be things like the money for our subways, federal funds for road repairs, those kinds of things. Obviously, anyone who's driven around or tried to ride the subway knows how desperately we need that money. And I think that, again, it's if it's been allocated by Congress, we're entitled to it. There's law that the president cannot engage in impoundment. The president cannot impound funds that have been earmarked to California. And normally they are. They don't just say, go spend $5 billion on transportation needs. They say, spend $1 billion on LA's subway, spend $1 billion on Oregon's road repair. And so Oregon, if it doesn't get the money for road repair and we don't get the money for the subway, I think that those lawsuits, Mark, will be successful. And, with Trump, a whole lot of it is to threaten and to hope that he can do a lot from his bully pulpit and from, yelling and haranguing that he really can't get at the end of the day from the courts. But can I mention one thing, Mark? I don't want to be really controversial, but I can't help but mention it. The first time I went on the station that shall not be named, the radio station, it was not with you and it was not with Pat Thurston. It was with another host you had in those days. And here, one of his producers said to me, whatever you do, don't advocate secession. So I remembered those words. Whatever you do, don't advocate secession for California. But, the idea that Trump will be the last Trumpian president, I'm kind of old for this fight. But, you have people who listen to you who are 20 and 30 years old. This is really what it's going to be like for California and some of the blue states. Someone like Vance, Rubio, Ted Cruz, they would be just as unpopular in California and want just as much to punish California. I think after this thing, especially with the people who are working and building up our economy and they're making their lives so miserable and torturing their families and all that, I really don't think any Republican will win major office in California for 100 years, Mark. And as that goes on and on and on, you wonder, what are we getting out of this? Really, what are we? Now, one thing we're getting out of it is that Texas is not invading us. We don't have an angry neighbor next to us. The idea we'd have Canada and we'd be the West Coast and there'd be another, we'd be the West America and they'd be the East American. What would really be so awful about that? One problem, right? We'd be richer. We'd be richer. We wouldn't be told what to do. We wouldn't have our 2 senators trying to fight against 4 senators just from the Dakotas. Okay, but Mark, and we have all these wonderful things, but we would have maybe right now we have 2 friendly neighbors and 2 big oceans. We'd have 2 friendly neighbors, 2 big oceans, and maybe an unfriendly neighbor. But we'd protect ourselves. We'd protect ourselves from
I mean,
the Midwest invading us.
Look, the only thing I would say to that, I mean, it's a nice kind of fantasy because I think you're right. I mean, it appears certainly under Trump and GOP dominance, and I would argue
that might be our George Washington. That might be our George Washington.
I mean, the reality is that Trump has already shown you that he has no qualms at all about bringing in troops. And if you were actually to secede or to attempt secession, there'd be the military to, pretty much send you the brushback pitch. You are not leaving the Union, California, especially because you're rich. You are not going anywhere. You know what I mean, David? Just as a practical matter, I love it. Again, I love it as a pipe dream, but I just see it as sadly impractical.
One last thing, we would be very friendly toward the other states. This would be with as little, what did Lincoln say? As little malice and rancor as possible. I would be very, very concerned. I'm willing to be one of our first diplomats to deal with things like New York. I want to be able to go to New York City just as readily as I do now. I don't want to be at a long passport line.
Right.
And if it were East and West, they do get to keep Florida, and a lot of Florida is not cool, but a lot of Florida is great. And they would get Florida. So I think a lot of people would still want to go to Florida. I'll tell you something funny, because as a federal criminal defense lawyer, I've been to 38 states. I've appeared in over 30 states in court, and I've been treated so well.
Right.
And so it's not a hostility toward the other states. I have friends from all the other states, but it's not fair, Mark, what they're doing to California. It's so unfair. We are, we're the big donors, we're a little bit like that situation in, Germany and East Germany, right? Where Germany reached out, West Germany reached out at great financial pain because they were so much richer and more efficient. And to be told what to do all the time by these small states. I mean, you name it, Mark. We've done it on the show week after week. Mephistoprone, they're going to try to get something where women in the blue states cannot take the abortion medication that 60% of women who decide to terminate their pregnancy have. You look at some of the things that they really want to impose on us. You were here, Mark. I breathed the air, maybe as a tourist. You weren't living here then, but I breathed the air in the late 60s here, and it was awful. The air here in LA was awful in the 60s, and we did something about it. Basically, in California, we managed to get the rest of the country's support for it, but we pay about $1 more per tank of gas, and people in California are fine with it, and we breathe much better air. They want to destroy our air quality. They want to they want to start with the Santa Barbara. We remember the Santa Barbara oil spill. It was awful. We're still feeling the bad effects of it. They want to start drilling again off the coast of California, not Florida. DeSantis and the Republicans say, no, that's way too fragile, but not our coast. Our coast isn't too fragile.
They don't care about trashing California environmentally. You're absolutely right. They're talking about, clearing for timber. He released all that water that would have actually helped farmers. It was stored in reservoirs in a way that, farmers use that when, as we get into a drought cycle, they desperately need water. I mean, it's a horror show what he's doing to California, but sadly, I think secession, is like, what we sit around in college, and smoke a bowl and talk about, wouldn't it be nice to, whatever. I mean, it's just
where are my weed smokers at?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a weed smoker's dream.
It would be done progressively. It would be done very friendly. And I guess
I like that you've gamed it out, but you'd be friendly. I don't think the other side is going to be so friendly. And
I think that the takeaway is, though, that people should take a look at federalism a little bit more. And I know that we don't want to give the states way too much power because of what happens to how they treat minorities, how they do other things and stuff. But maybe federalism isn't so bad. Maybe liberals should rethink federalism a little bit. That federalism is not just the domain of the never go forward. It was not always just a retrograde. That maybe federalism is something. And I think some people are realizing that. Like, for instance, the gas policy, the environmental things, that if we can't save the whole country, and you certainly can't with this current EPA, do everything you can to save California. And I know what you're saying. That right now they have the whip hand. They're in control. But it won't always be like that. Maybe we should be thinking about that before we have, like, there may be another respite. We may have like another 4 years. And then and certainly during those 4 years, think about, how do we avoid this situation of Trump 3? How do we avoid the situation?
Yeah, it'll be a GOP.
Avancer Ted Cruz, who's just another Trump. And we haven't made provision so that when that person comes to power in 7 years or in 11 years, that we're ready for it.
Yeah, I mean, I like how you think and game it out, and you have an optimistic view of the future. I don't know, frankly, this is a part of the longer conversations. Maybe we'll have these conversations at like the June Swoon event and elsewhere, even off the air. But I don't even know that, given the death grip that the GOP has on government right now, and even on the right to vote, and just the way in which they are approaching and setting the table for the kind of dominance that they clearly are exhibiting. I don't know about elections and winning elections in the future, but that, as I say, let's just put that as a...
Mark, I just wanted to say I am willing to be our new Ben Franklin, stay at the St. Regis in New York City and negotiate with the other side.
All right, I want to quickly, before I let you go, ask you about this largest jewelry heist in U.S. history. It was $100 million worth of jewelry jacked. Apparently, they followed this truck that had all of this jewelry from San Mateo, California, which is up in the San Francisco Bay Area, down to this place called Lebec, which is just sort of like a small place where they stopped. And the story was at the time that there were two drivers, two people associated with the truck. One of them went in to, take a break there for a half hour, and the other stayed with the stuff, stayed in the truck. But he fell asleep, didn't realize that there were all of these guys breaking into the back of the truck and stealing all the stuff. I never believed the story when I heard it, but they now arrested and charged 7 different people with this largest jewelry heist in U.S. history. Can you speak to this case?
Yes, I've actually followed this case for a while because I have a friend who showed his jewelry at that jewelry show, and I think it's in San Bruno. And then what they do is they want to try to get the best price they can, so they'll go to 4 or 5 different shows. Now, these are not like Tiffany's or Cartier, where they have a stationary store and you come in and they have amazing security procedures. So when they sell it at the show, Mark, they have a certain amount of security there, right? But then, the people have looked at the dealer there. The dealer there doesn't want to leave the premises with their jewelry, even in their car. They're worried that they're going to get jacked. So what they do is they have Brinks take all of it. They put it in a certain part of the Brinks truck. It looks just like the armored cars that you see driving around LA or San Francisco. This one that got jacked, except it's driving down now full of these bags. So let's say the 60 or 70 dealers each put their pieces in a big bag. And so it goes with these armed guards. And as you say, it's always been very, very suspicious. Now, the amount is interesting. I read the indictment, Mark. And the indictment says $100 million value ascribed by the victims. And the press release says the same thing. Now, Brinks is in a lawsuit now with these dealers. They have been for a couple of years. Brinks said it's only worth about $6 to $10 million. And the reason Brinks says they know that is because that's what they were insured for. Of course, that's a classic thing. The insurance is so high that although you're transporting $1 million worth of jewelry, you only insure it for $300,000 because the premiums are so high.
Sure.
And then, of course, you're stuck that you said that it was only worth $300,000 and you say it's $1 million. So nobody really knows whether it was $100 million, but I'll take their estimate that is the largest jewelry heist in American history. People ask me, Mark, sometimes, what kind of cases do I actually do? I always say I'm a working lawyer in a federal criminal defense. That one of the people in this ring hired me. That's the kind of case that I would take. And one of the cases that I have actually now is, if people remember last August, there were these so-called crime tourists. That was the term that they used. People who came here from other countries, especially from Chile, rented cars here, and then supposedly went on like a week or 2 week crime spree and were long gone. And were long gone before a criminal investigation could ever pinpoint them. Well, I represent the so-called kingpin of the crime tourism, one of those cases. And this is the kind of person who needs a criminal defense lawyer and someone experienced that involves all of these issues. One of the issues in this case, I have nothing to do with this $100 million grapevine case, nothing at all to do with it. But that case has a number of very thorny questions. How did the guy in the cab sleep through all of this?
This is
and you can speculate, Mark, on a lot of things. You can speculate that the driver, half an hour before he's going to stop, gives him a soda that's laced with something, right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
That he would want to have that person fall asleep. I have no idea whether that's true. I don't think that's one of the accusations, but all the people who love this is like a real crime thing. This is like Ocean's 11, where you haven't seen the movie and you're trying to figure out how on earth did this go down. It could also be that it was done so quietly, that they got into the cab so quietly. They come out of the car right behind. The guy really is asleep. They have an acetylene torch or something like that, right? And they open up so quietly, the guy sleeps through it. Well, you got to believe one other thing. He either was really tired and really sleeping hard. Somebody gave him something that made him sleep so hard. You can also speculate that maybe he wasn't asleep at all, that maybe this is a story. The other thing that's weird is that they get onto it very quickly out there in the middle of nowhere near this truck stop where they've just stopped to get a bite. The guy has an alibi, right? The other driver, one guy's asleep, the other guy has an alibi. He's in buying food, and the whole load is ripped off in this very short time, enough so that the cops get out there and they interview them. And one of them says, it's really funny because I was getting all these strange looks at the show. people were looking at me at the show. Now, of course, after the fact, Mark, you might say, oh my God, thinking this back, there was some suspicious activity at the show. But of course, the obvious question, where are all the good journalists, Mark? You need to interview these people. One of the questions is, wait a second, what did you do when people were looking at you suspiciously at that show around all those millions of dollars of jewelry? Did you tell Brinks? Did you tell somebody? What happened? Why didn't they send a car along with you? Why didn't they send some extra support? Anyway, it's a fascinating incident, Mark.
It's fascinating, you know. And the more you speak about it, because you're about the journalism part, I think you're right. I also think that it's the stuff of the documentary film world now. There are a lot of documentaries on the Gardner Museum heist, on a lot of these forgery type situations. There's a great movie about wine fraud, which is called Sour Grapes. I recommend all these movies. There's a movie called Made You Look, which is also about art fraud. But this one is a big one because of the, to me, what you described is, and you covered the story on when it first broke on the show, et cetera, the clear disconnect between the facts of the guy sleeping while the biggest jewelry heist in, as you say, we'll stipulate to the fact that it's the biggest jewelry heist in U.S. history is going on. I mean, you know, they torch the lock, et cetera, quietly enough that he sleeps through it. I mean, come on. I mean, it just strains credulity. And what I love that you've just said also, and I hadn't considered it, and I know that there's no evidence necessarily to back it up, but just as you're running out different narratives, that guy could be drugged in some way so that he actually does sleep so soundly. So it's actually the guy who goes inside that's in on it. I just love that, because I always thought it's the guy who's in the cab who says he slept through it. It's got to be him who's in on it. But no, they're probably, if you're going to go for conspiracy, maybe they're both in on it. You know, I'm going to go inside. You're going to be, you know, it's the whole thing is, it's wrapped up in a lot of stuff that still needs to be explained, I guess is what I would say. And you've articulated a bunch of it. So,
well, absolutely, Mark. And the other thing about it is that you wonder how the case actually broke. I mean, it's over 3 years old. You have 7 people who've been indicted. According to the indictment, 6 of them actually trailed the car hundreds of miles from the Bay Area. So it seems like they had 2 cars that were following the truck. And I guess the trucks are not, you know, they don't have anything that you can kind of tell if someone's tracking you. And I guess that makes sense. I mean, I imagine Brinks is doing an awful lot of work to figure out how they avoid something like this happening in the future. But
it's bad for the Brinks brand, I'll say that.
There's a 7th person. There's a 7th person who was not in the cars. I looked in the indictment.
Was he the 60-year-old? There's one 60-year-old guy, and everybody else is in their 30s.
There's one of the 7 who was not trailing in the cars. Okay. And you wonder if he was the fence. You wonder how come, you know, this is kind of distinctive. You know, it's special jewelry. It's not just, you know, a normal love bracelet or something. So you wonder, did the fence tell on them? Is one of the people the fence? How do you keep this thing secret? If you want to see how they tried to do it in Goodfellas, one of them is that you tell the people, don't spend any money. You're going to get whacked if you go buy yourself something fancy. And then De Niro says to the guy, I heard your wife got a Cadillac.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the other thing. Someone might have spent a lot of money, or somebody might have recognized one of those pieces and said, hey, Joey brought in that piece. A lot of ththose guys informed for the police, you know, a lot of jewelers and stuff like that. It's like, hey, you know, wink, wink. But if you see something really big, you call me. The cop says, you call me, okay? Don't be sit around like an idiot and not solve that $100 million Brinks job. But you do wonder why it took 3 years. And the last thing I want to say is they all seem to be from L.A. There's been a lot of publicity about the Chileans.
And some of them have been involved in other heists and other jewelry ripoffs.
Small. You know, I don't think that they knew there was 100 million on that thing. They thought they were going to get something. They obviously got onto that show. They had cased that show, the indictment says, about 9 or 10 days before. So they knew that show was something special. People showing really high-end, unique pieces of jewelry, antique jewelry, special pieces. But the 2 other things they got charged with, Mark, like a cargo theft, was like $150,000. So when these guys come into things that are worth millions of dollars like that, they probably made the mistakes that got them caught. But you still wonder, 3 years, Mark. 3
Yeah,
years.
what
Why it
what
took
was
that
the
long.
thing that revealed it? I'll tell you this real quick, just to share something from a show I did called Super Heist. I did it on CNBC. Most of the audience here who watches knows that I narrated that show. Now I think it was a year ago or something like that. Anyway, the point is maybe it's 2 years ago. There was one really great. All the stories are interesting, but there's one really great heist, and the reason it was great is it was sort of that Ocean's 11 kind of thing where they put the super criminals up, and like everybody's like, one guy's the perfect, world famous safe cracker, the other's a world famous tunnel digger, the other guy's a world famous communications and IT guy. They get them all together. The other guy is a great mastermind for distractions and sort of. This happened in Argentina. And it was a huge bank job. And it's fascinating. There are a bunch of other layers, but to keep it short, I'll just skip to the part that really applies to what we're talking about, which is they got away with it. They got away with this hugely complicated, well thought out and scripted plan. And it was the biggest bank heist in history anywhere. And they got all of this stuff, and completely, because of these guys being super villains, there was no trail. 2 years later, they busted them. And the reason they busted them was because the girlfriend of one of the guys got into a fight with him and broke up with him. And she went to the authorities and blew the whistle. So you wonder here, as you've said, what was the thing 3 years later that led to the authorities knowing about this and all of these guys being apprehended? I'll be really curious to know what it is.
Well, I think Albert will get a kick out of this. It sounds like they were the 1927 Yankees of crime. And I had a case years. I had a case years ago where this fellow is working in LA, it's a totally normal life, and they pick him up for like a 15-year-old case. And yeah, it was a former girlfriend. Former girlfriend got herself in trouble with the law. They said, you're going to women's prison for 2 years. She said, let's try this. Let's try. Here's what's behind door B. I'll tell you about this boyfriend of mine from 15 years ago. And, nowadays with DNA and everything else, but 3 years is still a long time for it to take. And the very last thing, Mark, is that, like I said, and I mean this in fun, joking around, but this was not a case where, what do they say in Hamilton? Let an immigrant do it. These were homegrown, not Chileans, not Argentinians.
That's right. That's right.
Homegrown talent. But I want to say there's something about homegrown talent.
Homegrown talent.
I want to say this about homegrown talent. What they were doing, the cargo theft thing sounded like one where they were very likely to get caught. I mean, they confront somebody. He says to him, "You say a word, I'm gonna F you up." He brandishes a knife. So I don't think these were the 1927 Yankees of theft. Weird that it took 3 years.
Katz, I love talking to you. You're great. Look forward to next week, and maybe get you in for June Swoon a week from tonight. We'll see.
I'd love to do that, Mark, and I'd love to hear one of your heist shows. Don't do any coverage of my cases. My own cases, way under the radar, Mark. Help me keep them way under the radar.
Your clients are all not guilty. That's what's so great about you. David Katz, everybody. Thanks, David. Love it, love it, love it. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.